Conroy, and we are back today with another edition of the Ad Podcast. And today I am super excited. We have our first author speaker for the podcast, Jeff Saas, who was kind enough to send me his marketing autobiography and business management book. Everything I know about business and marketing, I learned from the Toxic Avenger. A little bit of a mouthful, but we'll get into some of the content of this. And what this is really about is Jeff giving, I would say, a lot of marketing advice for his time at Troma Studios back in the 90s, really talking about marketing principles, but a lot of really great management principles that I picked up from this today as well. So Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Dylan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for taking the time to read the lengthy title of my book and everything in between the covers too.
I love it. Well, for those, we'll plug it again at the end, but we'll have it in the show notes for people to buy as well, because I think it's a great read. So Jeff, you've had a pretty storied career, obviously, that you document at length through the book in the entertainment industry at the beginning of your career. But will you walk us maybe through some of the highlights as you started to pivot into the marketing sector and kind of maybe touch a little bit about on what you're doing today, and then we'll get into the book.
Sure, absolutely, Dylan. Thanks. So I started my career in film and television, spending 14 years in New York in independent film production, distribution, sales, and marketing on a global basis. So it was really a great learning experience right out of school. Traveled around the world, went to the Cannes Film Festival every year and other film markets, traveled to different countries to import films. The first company I worked for out of college, we were the leading importer of English language foreign films. So we brought in films from Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain. I got a chance to work with people like Bruce Beresford and Mel Gibson back before they were famous, in the earlier parts of their careers. So that was a lot of fun. Eventually, I went to work for Troma for 7.5 years. Troma is the oldest independent film studio, I think, in the world right now. They're just celebrated 50 years in business, which is pretty amazing.
That is cool.
And I was there from 1987 to 1994, amongst many other claims to fame. When I left Troma, they hired a kid to replace me. His name was James Gunn. So James Gunn got his start in filmmaking at Troma thanks to me quitting. So one could argue, not very well, but one could argue that if it weren't for me, there'd be no James Gunn. That's not true. He's extremely talented and much more talented than I would ever be. But he got his start there as well. And the book, as you referenced, really pulls out business and marketing lessons I learned from making these wild and crazy independent films, because every film is like a little startup in its own right. So I do a lot of comparisons to filmmaking and entrepreneurship, and I think that's where a lot of the business and marketing lessons come from. But I've always been a bit of a gadget geek, and even at Troma, I introduced them to computers, and we were doing online chats on CompuServe and AOL with the Toxic Avenger as a character. Long before social media even existed, I used to go online and type as Toxie, answering questions from people in the Showbiz forum on CompuServe. So I've always been very gadget oriented. And while I was at Troma, we did a deal with a company called Game Tech to do CD-ROM games for Reading Rainbow. Believe it or not, Troma got into the licensing business when we did our Saturday morning cartoon show, The Toxic Crusaders. And I was able to convince Reading Rainbow, the PBS show, the Emmy Award-winning PBS show, to let Troma, the company behind the Toxic Avenger, handle their licensing and merchandising, which was a miracle. And I made a deal with a up-and-coming company called Game Tech here in Florida, where I live now, to do some interactive educational CD-ROMs based on Reading Rainbow. And I came down a few times, and I really became fascinated with the interaction at that point between traditional entertainment and interactive entertainment and CD-ROMs and video games. I ended up leaving Troma so that James Gunn could have a job, and moved down to Florida to join Game Tech and got into the computer and video game business, and was in that industry for a number of years. Got to work with William Shatner on his Tech War game. I've got lots of Captain Kirk stories, but that's for another show. But spent a lot of time with Mr. Shatner, Bill. Then from there, got involved in entrepreneurship and got involved with a couple of startups and starting a few companies and kind of shifted away from the game business into other areas. And marketing as a creative person, I've written for film and television. I wrote the book. I've always found marketing as a great way to be able to flex those creative muscles in a business fashion. So virtually every role I've ever held, no matter what industry it's been in, because it's been on the marketing side, I've been able to write, whether that's writing ad copy or writing marketing mumbo jumbo, as we say. It's still an opportunity to flex those written, writing muscles, and the same for even production when it comes to, working on the sets of commercials or getting involved with other things, even working with celebrities and influencer marketing. My background in entertainment helped with that as well. So everything kind of goes full circle. It's kind of like how Steve Jobs says, when you look backwards, you can connect all the dots. So, my career, long as it's been over 40 years now, it's been a long and winding road, but everything contributed to the next thing. Even if there was no master plan, as I look back on it, I can see how, I'm doing this now because I did this then, and I learned this then, and now I'm able to apply it now, even if it's across multiple industries. And more recently, I got involved in the domain name industry. Back in 2012, I was a co-founder and CMO of .club domains. So we applied for and got the rights to offer .club domains. So instead of .com or .biz or .org, .club. And then we grew that to over 1 million registrations and sold that company to GoDaddy in 2021. And then I worked for an e-commerce company called paw.com as the CMO. We do pet products, and paw.com evolved from a startup incubator we created while I was at .club called Startup.club. And then in January of this year, I got back into the domain industry by joining the .art team. So just like there was a .club, there's a .art. And .art is really interesting and exciting because we have a lot of strong connections in the art world, and we have over 250,000 artists, museums, galleries, etc., who are using a .art domain, and we've got a lot of other services and products that we've created to help support artists and people working in the art world, all aspects of the art world. So it's been very fun and very exciting.
That's awesome. And we'll get back. I definitely want to pick your brain on your expertise around having strong domains equals having a strong brand. And I think you've got a lot of insight to talk about there. Absolutely. So first thing I'd love to do is jump in and spend the beginning half of the show on the book, because I think that was pretty insightful stuff. So the first thing I'd love to ask you, I read, I believe, in kind of the ending of the book, that the inspiration from the book actually came from an Ignite talk that you gave as a dad influencer when you were invited to a Ford activation at, I think, Detroit Auto Show, or maybe a Ford technology exposition. But you were a bit of an influencer yourself in the early days of the blogosphere as a dad influencer. So would love to, we'll get back to your dad influencer stuff in the later half of the show, but can you talk a little bit about what the inception was for the book and how that Ignite talk really kind of gave you a format and a framing for what you wanted to do with the book?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad you read it to the back of the book, and there's a link. There's a link to that presentation because someone did capture it on video.
Nice.
Yes. So as a dad blogger back then, I was invited to an event hosted by Ford in Michigan, and it was, we went to the auto show and we went to the museums and all that stuff. And they said one night at the dinner they were going to have an Ignite talk event, and they were asking for people to participate. And basically the format for that Ignite talk is you have 5 minutes and 20 slides, but the slides advance automatically every 15 seconds. So you have there's no clicker in your hand, you have no control of it. So every 15 seconds, it just goes to the next slide. You get exactly 5 minutes, you get exactly, at the end of 5 minutes, the mic gets shut off, the lights go out, and you get 20 slides that advance automatically. So I was trying to think, well, what could I do that would fit that format, that would be interesting and entertaining, that would be visually interesting, because with slides every 15 seconds, really they have to be big images. You're not going to be looking at the slide and reading bullet points, which you should never do anyway. Yeah. And I don't know why it popped into my head that, I have all this experience with Troma. We made these crazy movies. I've got lots of images, and I thought that would make a good presentation. So I put together that Ignite presentation around the same topic, everything I know. I think at the time I called it Everything I Know About Marketing I Learned from the Toxic Avenger, and I had my 20 slides in advance, 15 every 15 seconds. And at the end of the presentation, in my last few seconds, I said, I only have 5 minutes, but I could probably talk about this for much longer. In fact, I could probably turn it into a book, and maybe one day I will. And that's how I ended the presentation.
So
And then
good.
like 6 or 7 years later, the light bulb went off in my head. You remember when I said I should turn that into a book? I probably should. And so I did. But there's a link in the book to that 5-minute Ignite presentation. And that really was the inspiration for writing the book.
That's awesome. So the first thing I'd love to get into is you talk a lot in the book about how launching a film or an entertainment project, but especially an independent film, is much like launching a startup. And even in the independent studio space, which maybe is thought of as maybe less organized and structured as the traditional studio space, time is money of the most grand scale. As you look at an independent film schedule that might be a 21-day shoot, or maybe even less than that, time is money. Like, you guys plan down to weather patterns where if it rains today, we know what we're doing as an alternative. Every single minute, every single day is budgeted for. And you really talked about how that is much like, creating a business plan for a startup. So can you talk a little bit about the similarities and kind of the parallel path of being an entrepreneur and an independent film producer?
Absolutely. And not only time is money, but also money can't buy time. So in many respects, being independent and having a low budget is sometimes more of an advantage than a disadvantage, because there are many problems that come up, especially in filmmaking, that can't necessarily be solved by throwing money at it. If you're at a location that you only have the rights to film at on that particular day, and the sun is going down and you didn't get all the shots in you need in that location, you can't fix it by throwing money at it, especially if it's a location that just simply won't be available ever again. So even if you couldn't book it again. So you really have to work on a day-to-day schedule. And I think the similarities between, making a film and a startup are dramatic, because it's the same thing. You have an idea, your business plan is your script, you have your production schedule is kind of like your operating plan. You staff up, you have to hire and fire just like you have to do with a startup. You staff up for that film. You've got to complete your product, complete the film, and you've got to bring it to market and find your audience. So the similarities between, being an entrepreneur and being a filmmaker are endless, and truly every filmmaker is an entrepreneur. But the difference is, and the big difference in where the lessons can be learned is, you have much less flexibility, to the point that you mentioned, Dylan. You're on a time schedule with making a film. You have a 3-week shoot. You have this day in this location. You have these actors or actresses only available at these times. In business, especially in startups, it's a lot looser in many cases, right? And I think many entrepreneurs don't feel, although they could benefit from feeling it, they don't feel the day-to-day pressure that you feel as a filmmaker, where you have a schedule broken down day to day. And I have a chapter in the book where I talk about one of the lessons I learned is really understanding, what are the bare necessities? What are like the 3 or 4 things that you must have to move forward? And when you're making a film, actually, it's very simple. Number one, you have to have a camera. No camera, can't make a film.
Yeah.
You have to have film in the camera. Now, that was back then. Today, you have to have sufficient digital storage and batteries. But the issue is the same. You have to have a means of capturing what the camera can record. And then you have to have actors and actresses to put in front of the camera to tell your story. If you don't have those 3 things, it doesn't matter if you have the best director in the world. It doesn't matter if you have the best screenplay that was ever written. It doesn't matter if you have the most beautiful location you could have ever secured. If you don't have a camera, if you don't have a means of recording on film or some other medium, and if you don't have actors and actresses to get in front of that camera, you can't make your film. So in business, we're often not that structured, right? You can talk to many entrepreneurs, and if you ask them, like, what are the 3 most important things that you should be doing today that are actually moving your business forward? A lot of times we don't have a good answer for that. It's very easy to be busy, but being busy is not necessarily moving your business forward. And so in the book, I talk about as a lesson from that is, think about your business, think about what you're doing, and can you break it down to 3 or 4 must-have things that you must be doing on a regular basis to keep that business moving forward, as opposed to all the other extraneous things you might be doing, which could be fun, they could be interesting, they could be challenging, but they may not actually be moving your business forward.
Yeah, I love that. It's also similar to the idea that 20% of the activity that you do generates 80% of the results, or something like that.
Yeah.
So how do you focus more time on that 20%? That core, doing the work that actually moves the needle in your business. I think that's a really great perspective. So early in the book, you share a story about how you actually came up with a tagline for Toxic Avengers movie during just a routine introductory meeting with the producers that you ended up working for later on. You sat down with them and they asked you your feedback on a poster, and you actually came up with a better line that they ended up using. And I think what I thought was really interesting about this idea is that a lot of people guard their ideas as if they might get stolen, but sometimes you have to think of the world as a generosity, net benefit out there, that there's more out there to be gained than to be stolen. So can you talk a little bit about this principle?
Absolutely. And I think, it's even more important today because there's so many tools available. We could do a whole show on AI and how it's changing things, but
Yep.
there's so many tools available today that if you're talented and if you have an idea, if you keep it too precious, if you keep it to yourself, all you're doing is limiting the opportunities for that idea to ever get executed upon. And ideas, this has been said a million times, ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody has ideas. Not everybody can execute on those ideas. And most ideas are not necessarily original, but the people who execute on those ideas, who bring them to fruition and bring them to life, are the ones who get the credit for creating it, even if a million people may have had the same or similar ideas beforehand, but they never did anything about it. And I've always found, especially going into pitches, going into job interviews, sharing, what you're capable of doing and not worrying about whether or not they steal the idea or do it without giving you credit, pays off much more in the long run than keeping things to yourself and then they never get executed on. So I think that's a lesson I learned early on, and this was one example. I was there meeting Trauma because I wanted to try to acquire the TV rights to some of their movies for the company I was working for at the time, Satori Entertainment. And when giving the tour, we went up to the editing room and they were cutting a new trailer for the Toxic Avenger, the original. And Lloyd showed it to me and asked me what I thought. And I said, well, it was very, very bland and very straightforward. I think the tagline at the time was "a different kind of hero," which was kind of bland. And then I said, well, isn't this movie, I know it's violent and I know it's, R-rated, but it also has this tongue-in-cheek sense of humor about it. And he says, yes, it does. I said, well, there's nothing that indicates that here. A different kind of hero could be anything. And I said that the Toxic Avengers from New Jersey, right? Tromaville is based in New Jersey. And they said, yes. I said, well, why not call him the first superhero from New Jersey? Which has the same effect, mentioning it's a superhero, but there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke there because everyone knows New Jersey is made fun of, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, oh, can I use that? I said, sure. And that became, to this day, the tagline for that movie. So,
so great.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I think it's a great lesson in, having that mindset of abundance and that people aren't out there to steal your ideas. And hey, sometimes theft is the best form of flattery, right?
Absolutely. And of course, there's fine lines there. Obviously,
Sure.
if you've submitted a screenplay and they're copying word for word something you're doing and not giving you credit for it, that's a different story. But generally speaking, just because you have an idea doesn't mean that someone else hasn't had a similar idea. And getting that idea to come to life is where the benefit comes, not just sitting on the idea.
No, I love that. So my next question goes into the idea and the challenges of branding a movie studio. You talked a lot about how Troma is maybe one of a handful of movie studios that actually have a brand as a studio itself. It has a specific cult audience of fans that buy the product or are ready to watch films from Troma specifically because they have a style that people have come to appreciate and love, and have had that cult success of, things that pick up steam maybe in the home video window and maybe weren't theatrically successful, but then become cult favorites later. You give the example of Disney, of course, which everybody knows what Disney films are going to be like and come to expect a certain level of product, especially now after Marvel and Star Wars acquisitions. But can you talk into some of the general challenges that go into branding a movie studio and why that was important to do at Troma? And then also, if you could think of any other successful examples that are, maybe in more modern time.
Yeah, well, I think, as you pointed out, there were very few studios that have a really strong brand. No one went to the movies back then because it was a Paramount picture or it was from 20th Century Fox. You go to a movie because, you know who the actors are, the story, you've read the book, there's a million other reasons. The studio that produced it is typically not among them. Except in the cases you pointed out for Disney and Troma. I'd say today, if you want to look at modern studios, I'd say Blumhouse is doing a really good job of kind of building a brand in that horror genre. I think that no one's going to go to a Blumhouse film and expect to see a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
So they're doing a good job. But that same kind of brand building applies not just to movies or studios. It's really any business. To build that brand at Troma, at Disney, at Blumhouse, wherever, you have to really have a deep understanding of who your customer is, who's your audience, and understand how to cater to that audience with the products and services you provide. So we knew who the Troma fans were. And to be honest, when I joined Troma, I wasn't a fan of their movies per se. If I was sitting at home with Friday night and opened up a beer and said, okay, what movie I'm going to watch, a Troma movie was not going to be amongst my choices. I wasn't a hardcore fan, but what I was a fan of was making films. I loved the process of filmmaking. And I loved the idea that, we were making something. And even if it wasn't my cup of tea, there were millions of people out there who were drinking that tea and loved what we were brewing. And I enjoyed and became passionate about serving that audience, right? So even if I wasn't making the movie that I would want to see necessarily, I was making the movie that I knew our fans would want to see. And I would do my best to make the best damn Troma movie I could make to serve that audience. And I think that's true for any business. Your brand is built upon how the world perceives you, not how you perceive yourself. So when you have a deep understanding of who your customers are, and then you can build products and services that appeal to them, then you're living up to your brand. You're living up to their expectations, which really is what builds your brand in many respects.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that led into one of your other management principles, was that, there's this huge emphasis nowadays on, I feel like especially with, I'm a millennial, but definitely with the Gen Zs, is that, I should be doing something that I'm passionate about, or I should be monetizing my passion. But what you clearly pointed out was, sometimes it's not about monetizing or doing something that you're passionate about, but it's finding something that you can be passionate about in your work. So for you, like you mentioned, wasn't really your cup of tea, wasn't the genre of film that maybe you would have picked off the shelf, at Blockbuster back in the time, or rented on Netflix or iTunes, or, wherever you consume entertainment content. But what you got extremely passionate about was the fans and serving those fans, exactly, and knowing that you were going to make the best movie possible for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think whatever you do, everyone's had jobs that they don't particularly love in their career. But if you can find something about it that you can become passionate about, then you can find a way to love that job and love that and enjoy your career. There's always something you could be passionate about. If you're in customer support, you could be passionate about, putting a smile on the face of the person at the other end of the phone or the other end of the chat, or whatever it may be. So yeah, I found ways to be passionate about what I was doing at Troma, even though I wasn't particularly passionate about the films we were putting out directly, and I think anyone can find that. Yes, it's always, they say, pursue your passion, but it's not as easy to do that and make it a career as it sounds. And quite frankly, today there's so many opportunities and tools to pursue your passion as a side hustle,
yeah,
but still have a so-called day job, or now with work from home, it could be day, it could be night, it could be whenever. but having another source of income. But even then, you still have to find something that you can wrap your heart around and wrap your arms around and be passionate about. And I challenge that almost anyone could find that thing, no matter what they do for a living. And if you find it, you'll be a lot happier and you'll perform a lot better and you'll have a better career.
Yeah, I love that. So in chapter 12, you talk about the idea of sometimes being finished is better than being perfect. Can you talk a little bit about that principle?
Yeah, and this is more true today than ever before because of the fast pace. You know, there's the old expression, what perfect is the perfect is the destroyer of good, or something like that. I can't
Yeah,
remember
right.
what the exact expression is, but yeah, you can wait too long. I mean, Seth Godin talks about it a lot in his writing about shipping, how important it is to ship. Just ship your product,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
ship doesn't mean put it in the mail. It means just launch your product. And Eric Ries with the Lean Startup, same ideas. Get that MVP out there, start getting feedback, because that's how you're going to actually learn from putting your product or service out in the real world, instead of sitting back and waiting and refining and refining and refining and refining to what you think is perfect or right, but you really don't know until you put it in the hands of customers. You might think it's a great film, but until you put it up on the screen in front of an audience, you have no idea. You might like it, but maybe they don't. So it's really important to put things out there to get that feedback. And it's changed. The world has changed so much. When I was coming up in New York in the early '80s, there were broadcast standards, like a jump cut, for example. Pre-MTV, a jump cut was essentially illegal. Like if you had
wow.
if you put something on television and there was a jump cut in it, you'd get fined by the FCC. It was
Oh my
rejected,
gosh.
right? Now not only do we have jump cuts everywhere, and no one worries about it, but we have broadcast networks airing footage from Zoom calls and cell phones, and none of these things would have been broadcast quality, when I was starting out. So to hold back and work on something forever and ever to get to get that perfect broadcast quality, not only are you going to miss the opportunities, but today in many fields, especially in social media, if it's too polished, it becomes inauthentic, right? So you almost can't make it too good, right? If it's too good, people are turned off because now it's not authentic, right?
Doesn't feel
It
real.
looks too slick, you know. So you have now even major productions, dumbing down, pardon the expression, but kind of
Right.
dumbing down the production values of things they're putting out so that they look more natural and more authentic and more homegrown and more, shot on my iPhone, not on a Ikegami, $900,000 camera. So yeah. So I like today more than ever, it's more important to put something out there. In most fields where I think it's been detrimental, not to get political, but in the case of news and news media, it's been
Yeah.
a detriment, because the rush to get things out and not have them be perfect means that there's not a lot of fact checking. There's not a lot of good investigative reporting like there used to be, because people are in such a mad rush to be first and get it out there fast. So for most businesses, it's not a problem to put it out early. I think when it comes to reporting on actual news, not so much.
Yeah, totally. And I think you mentioned in some other parts of the book, in general, we're not curing cancer, we're not doing things that are all that important. So it's
Yeah.
probably less important, obviously, with pharmaceuticals. And yeah, I think you make a really good point on the news side. It doesn't really matter what side of the political spectrum you are. That is really a universal truth, is that, the news industry, because it's all about speed now, it generally lends itself to less accuracy, because, you're not taking
Yeah.
the time to fact check and really understand what's going on before you put stuff out. So I think that's a really interesting point. So in chapter 8, you talk about another management philosophy, which I thought
By the
was
way, I love that
yeah.
you're naming. I love that you're naming the chapters by number. You know this book better than I do. Chapter 8. Let's see. That was. Let me think. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I love it. Yeah, it's I don't know what. Well, what I thought was really helpful about the book. When I was reading through, I was able to write down a handful of questions at the beginning, and then I got so engrossed in the storytelling that I couldn't. And I got towards the end, and I'm like, wow, I haven't even made a note. I haven't answered a question. all the, for the last, 20 chapters, I'm going to have to go back and reference. And then the best part was you had a summary at the end that just lightning speed goes through just the principles and kind of gives a blurb on each one as kind of a recap. And as a business book, I thought that was a really great way to help the reader kind of summarize and turn some of the action steps into like things that you can actually go out and implement. So bravo on how you formatted that.
Thank you. Yeah. I tried to just give a little recap of the lessons from each chapter just at the end of the book, so you could just review them real quick. And the short chapters, most of the chapters are a page or 2 pages. It's very short and to the point. And that I was inspired by Stephen Pressfield, I think, wrote a book called Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. And it's a really great book on writing. It's right up there with Stephen King's on writing. Just a really good book about writing. But and it had these really super short chapters. Like some chapters were like a title and a paragraph, and that inspired me when I was working on my book to follow that kind of format and just keep the chapters short and tight. So he was a little bit of an inspiration there.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, look, the best business books are the ones that tell great stories. No one wants to be lectured to, but when you tell real life stories about how you came to learn these different principles, they become a lot more relatable and credible, I think. So that was also, very effective in my opinion. So in chapter 8, you talk about a management philosophy, and I felt this was almost a bit counterintuitive, myself having worked in the entertainment industry before I went into marketing at, places that are notoriously known for egos and corporate hazing, yelling and screaming, things like that. But you talked about a philosophy of using I versus we.
Yeah.
And in the film business, there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of people that want to take credit for other people's work, people below them. It's all about the cult of personality, et cetera. But can you talk a little bit more about how Troma engaged in that culture of we versus I?
Yeah, the power of we, and this is something I still try to practice, to this day. I think it's really important in any business. So at Troma, it was literally the law. Like the law was, you never said I, right? It was always we. It's always the Troma team. If you see the end credits of a Troma movie, it's a Troma team release, always. And literally, this was in the early days. Email was just not even quite emerging yet. So you wrote a lot of letters, and all the letters always had to start with literally, no matter who it was from the founders of the company to the intern who's unpaid, the letters always started with greetings from Tromaville and always we. If you were inviting someone to meet you for lunch and it was just going to be you and them, you would still say, we would like to have lunch with you on Tuesday. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. It was always we. There was no I in Tromaville. I mean, technically there's the letter I in the word Tromaville, but we were never allowed to say I. And it was literally strictly enforced. Like Lloyd Kaufman, one of the founders of Troma, would lose it if someone, if he came across a letter and it said, I, this is not about you. This is about us. This is about the Troma team. It's we. I mean, he really would go off on the deep end sometimes. He's calmed down over the years, but back then, but it's really important because I think everyone can relate, unless you are truly a sole practitioner or a painter who paints on your own canvas with no help from anyone. There are very few roles in business that are truly one person doing something alone. There's always other people who've contributed to the project, right? And when you go into a meeting and someone speaks for the group and says, well, I found this and I did this and I did that, everyone else who was part of that process or part of that project is kind of scratching their head and say, what am I, chopped liver? I was part of that too. Versus someone who goes in and doesn't take the credit themselves and says, hey, we got together, we researched this, we put this together, we edited this video, whatever it might be, and they look around the room and they acknowledge the other people who are part of that. It changes everything, right? It gives everyone the credit. If you're a manager, if you're a founder of a company, if you're a CEO, if you're a manager of other people, your job is not to make yourself look good. Your job is to make them look good. Your job is to help your team succeed. And to engender that feeling, it's we, right? When you talk about something, I didn't do this. We did this. And I think it's really important. And even today, it was hammered into me so deeply, almost 40 years ago at Trauma, that even today, when I say I in a meeting, I feel guilty. Like I feel like,
Wow.
I still write in my emails, I still tend to say we a lot more than I say I. And that's not a bad thing. I'm happy to do it. So I think, it's really important. And that little change of wordage can change the whole culture of a company too, because it takes away, as you said, it takes away that ego. And it from a manager's perspective, as a manager, you're showing the team that you support them when it becomes about we and not about I.
Yeah, I love that. And, it kind of ties into another principle that I didn't have a question to ask you about, but you did talk a lot about talking about how culture is not necessarily something that you can manufacture by having a cool office with, the foosball tables and the free
Yeah.
lunch and, putting your, power statements up on the wall and stuff like that, or having a cult leader personality that we see in some of these, crazy startup stories these days, like WeWork, the rise and fall of
Yep.
WeWork, or even the movies about Uber and some of these other places. But, things like what you were talking about, the founders really enforcing that idea of like, hey, this is a team effort. And especially, in the movie industry, having been part of, I was part of a team of 5 guys that put together $7.5 million to finance an independent film myself back in the early 2000s. And, it's, I mean, we were the guys banging the phones and, getting the money in the door for the movie, but there was a whole host of other people out there on the movie set and editing and down to craft services. Just every aspect of a film is a collaborative journey, and so many people play a role. So it's refreshing to hear that the way you characterize, the founders or the principals at Tromba, they were very colorful guys and definitely high energy.
Very much.
but also had these real great foundational principles that were of humility and teamwork and team effort. So
Yeah, and humility was important too, as you were touching on before. We weren't curing cancer, so we couldn't take ourselves too seriously, and I think that's a problem with a lot of startups. I think there's been a rude awakening now that the economy has changed and money's not free, and the VC funds are drying up a bit. But there was a period of time where every startup founder thought they were their stuff didn't stink and that they were changing the world. And not every startup is going to change the world. That doesn't mean it's not going to be a great business and change people's lives and support many families. But you have to understand, you have to be self-aware. Not only as individual people, we have to be self-aware, but as a business, you have to be self-aware and really understand, what role does your business play in the world. And that doesn't mean it's not important, but it means that how you approach it is important, right? So we never took ourselves too seriously at Trauma, but we took our business seriously. We took the business of making movies seriously, but we never took ourselves too seriously. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even though we were making arguably crappy movies, the reviewers loved Trauma. Famous film reviewers, Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert, and all these famous reviewers and film critics were generally very kind to Trauma, despite the types of crappy, cult, cult movies we were making. They were generally kind to us because they appreciated the tongue-in-cheek aspect of some of what we were doing and the fact that we didn't take ourselves too seriously. I think that was very welcome by the film critic community, and so Troma has always been treated very kindly. And even to the point where now, there's a remake of The Toxic Avenger that has been filmed. It's only played at one festival so far. I don't know when it's going to hit the theaters, but Peter Dinklage plays the Toxic Avenger, so he is Toxic. Kevin Bacon plays one of the villains. It's got an all-star cast, and it's a remake. And Macon Blair wrote it and directed it, and it's supposed to be pretty good. It's getting good advanced reviews, so I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, me neither. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah, so Toxie lives on. And when we talked about Disney as a comparison, I would argue that the Toxic Avenger as a literary character has had more varied iterations than any other character, including Mickey Mouse, because the Toxic Avenger, not only has he been in R-rated blood and guts horror movies, but he's been in a Saturday morning cartoon show. He's been in toys and games. He's been in a Broadway musical, an off-Broadway musical. Now he's in a major Hollywood film. Mickey Mouse has not been in any R-rated movies. So,
Yeah,
Toxie's got one over Mickey Mouse.
I love it. Well, yeah, I'm mainly familiar with the cartoon show. That was kind of my generation.
Yep.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Toxic Avengers were kind of in the same era for me. So that's really cool. So in chapter 15, you talk about a Mark Twain quote called swallowing the frog in the morning. My old sales manager used to tell me, he said, Dylan, you need to start every day by making the sales call that you were most afraid of, calling back that customer that was pissed off at you, or calling and talking to that deal that you were afraid wasn't going to close, you were a little iffy on, and if you didn't get it, it was going to break your quota. Making that call, starting each day with the call that you were most scared to make made all the rest of them feel like a cinch. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And I think you also framed it in a way that was really interesting, which is throwing a team into a hard project up front, with a movie schedule, maybe, shooting your building exploding in the beginning of the film, because that's going to be the most challenging thing to do. It really bonds that team. So can you talk about that concept, and more importantly, how it bonds a team?
Yeah, but what your guy told you about sales is the same idea. I mean, basically, starting with the hard stuff first, and for team building, So I think it was really Michael Hers, who was the co-founder of Troma with Lloyd Kaufman. This was his big thing. Like he, as one of the directors, often would like to start the first day of filming with a stunt, right? So we'd start a stunt on day one, because stunts are very complicated. It could be dangerous. It involves a lot of extra people on the set, because you may have medical crew there standing by. You have multiple cameras typically when you're filming a stunt, so you might have 3 or 4 cameras going, or even more if it's a big explosion or something you can only do once. So there's a lot of complication involved, and it's hard, right? So if you start on day one filming a stunt, it forces, number one, you get one of the hardest things out of the way, just like swallowing the frog or taking that tough sales call first thing in the morning. But number two, it really forces everyone to focus, right? And you're going to find out right on that first day, who are the people who are up for the task and who are not. And maybe some people won't be there after the first day by their own volition or by the film company's volition, but you'll know right away who are the people who are going to stick it out and be ready to endure this 8 or 12 week journey of making a film, which is a tough journey. So it was a really good thing to do by starting with something really difficult. It really brought everyone together. And then, of course, when you accomplish that, now you're on day 2 of filming, and everyone has that bond. Like, wow, yesterday we blew up that building and everything went great. We're in this, we're up and running. And so you really come out of the gate at an accelerated pace in terms of team building, in terms of understanding the competency of all the different players, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good practice in film and in business too. If there's a tough thing to do, let's get it done. Let's bite the bullet and just get it done.
Yeah, I love that. So in chapter 26, you talk about a story in the impact of the ROI of attending the Cannes film market paid off for you guys in a really big way. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the story, but I think the lesson for experiential marketers is that you can't always measure the success of a conference or an in real life activation by the immediate direct ROI and impact on sales pipeline. And a lot of this is for the B2B marketers out there and the sales teams that are covering conferences and things like that. And really, you guys showing up year after year, investing in the big suite at AFM and at Cannes, putting yourself in a place where you guys were on the same level as the big boys. Some of the stuff that you guys were doing, out on the guerrilla side, like putting flyers into car windows and having Toxie walk along the Crissat and take pictures with the paparazzi and people who are down on the beach. Really it was that consistency that eventually paid off for you guys. So can you talk a little bit more about that and just that consistency component?
Yeah, and it's really about the residual value of attending trade shows, and I think it's a timely topic now because post COVID, everyone's kind of getting back into the swing of
Yeah.
things,
Big time.
and going to conferences and trade shows is big again. And it's really hard to go to a conference once and see a real ROI. I mean, there are very few businesses, in my opinion, that do that, where you can walk out of the show and say right then and there, this was worth coming to. But there's a lot of residual value, and that consistency, Dylan, as you said, is a big part of it. So the story in the book with Troma is, yeah, we were a shitty little company with not much money, yet we really, squeezed every penny we could to go to these big important events each year. Go to the Cannes Film Festival. We were one of the members of AFM and got involved in that. And it cost us a lot of money. It was tough. We had, we doubled and tripled up in hotel rooms to make it work. But we were there, and rarely did we do any actual business there. But we went back year after year. And one year, we're sitting in our suite in the Carlton Hotel, which was ridiculously expensive, but that's where the action was. That's where you had to be taken seriously. And a guy walks into our suite wearing a very nice tailored suit, does not look like the typical Troma fan. Uh, Actually, it might have even been the same day that Quentin Tarantino came into our suite and told us what a fan of Troma he was. But that's another story. But anyway, this guy walks in, super well dressed, and he just comes right in. And he says, "I want to buy some films." And we didn't give him a pitch or anything. And he goes, "I want this, this, this." Like he knew exactly which films he wants, and he put together a package that was worth a couple $100,000 for the rights to certain Troma movies in his territory. I want to say he was from Belgium. I can't remember exactly what country it was, but he literally just walked in, and in 10 minutes, he put together one of the biggest packages we had ever sold, and takes out his checkbook, because at those days you literally would get a deposit, with a check that you take back and hope and pray that it goes through when you try to cash it. But and he did all this in like 10 minutes. And so we asked him, who are you, and why are you doing this? And what he said was, look, I've been coming to the Cannes Film Festival for 20 years. Every time I come, I see you guys here. I see you working hard. I see you presenting your films. I know you're real. I've never been ready for this type of movie in my market. Now I'm ready. And that was that. But the fact that we had been there year after year after year, if we hadn't, he never would have walked in on that day and made that big sale. So it really drove home this notion of residual value. So all those years before, we didn't make any money, but that one big sale probably made all those years profitable for us.
Yeah, I love it. Between this story, I was on a call with a colleague the other day, and I found out that he was investing $350,000 on a marketing spend with a conference series that I've only ever invested $15,000 in. And you get what you pay for to some degree. He's gone all in. He's put all his chips with these guys. They treat him like gold. They send him a lot of really good deal flow. And then for me, because I've only dabbled and dipped my toe in, I haven't really had the impact. So I think I'm going to take this and try and implement it and go a little bit deeper with some of my marketing partners.
And as you said before, consistency. So even if you don't go so deep, but if you go regularly, because some companies will come in, make a big splash at a trade show one year and then disappear and never
Yeah.
come back. That's almost worse than spending less, but coming 3, 4, 5 years in a row, so that people get to know you, people see you, people start to take you more seriously for the consistency.
Yeah, I love that. And we've been working with Adobe for over 7 years on some of their bigger trade shows, like National Association of Broadcasters and International Broadcasters Conference. And even though they've got about a quarter of the floor space that Avid has, they have more impactful activations on the ground. They bring in big influencers, big special effects guys, to debut unique films at their booth, and to do Q&As and to do panels and have influencers running around the conference and capturing content that they're putting out in real time. So sometimes just because it looks like you're not making the biggest investment, you might be investing in other ways to make that activation come to life. So I think that's an important lesson for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, in chapter 32, you talk about a story where you guys found unique talent in an unexpected place with the acquisition of the redneck zombie film. Amazing, funny story about these guys literally camping out on your doorstep. But could you maybe talk a little bit about how this has maybe impacted you as far as you look at talent and hiring? I'm kind of in a place these days where I'm less concerned with what school you went to and what blue chip job experience you have on your resume. And I'm looking more for real life indication that you have certain X factors or certain skill sets or certain work ethics that would make you a good addition to my team. Could you talk a little bit about finding talent in unexpected places?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. And I think that trend today, again, because of the various changes in our present day world, is more prevalent now too, where it's really more important to get the right people with the right attitude. Skills can be learned, but personality, attitude, integrity, those things can't be learned, right? Right. So you want to find people who meet those cultural requirements first and foremost, and then hopefully, obviously all things being equal, if you have two people who can do the job and one is a better fit for all these other reasons, you're going to go with that person. In this case, it was bizarre. The Troma building was on 9th Avenue in New York City in Hell's Kitchen. Today, it's a very trendy neighborhood, but back then it was definitely not trendy at all. It was pretty seedy and shady at the same time. And I often came in early and was the one who unlocked the door. There was a big roll-up gate, to get into the 4-story walk-up building. And one morning I get there and it's cold out. It's wintertime, and these two guys sitting on the stoop, against the rolled down metal door. And I just assumed they were, two unhoused neighbors, uh, of which there were quite a few in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's what I assumed. And it's kind of said, guys, excuse me, you're gonna have to move. This is a business. We got to open up, thinking they were not there for Troma. And then they look up and rub the dust out of their eyes from like sleeping there all night and say, is this Troma here? And I'm like, yes. Oh, great. Can we come inside? And I open up the gate, and it was Perry Lunis and his partner Ed Bishop, and they were two young filmmakers who made this wild and crazy movie on VHS. It was actually one of the first films to be distributed that was originally made on tape and not film, believe it or not.
Wow.
And they wanted to meet us. They said they came all the way from Maryland. I let them come in to warm up. They said that we brought our film. We want to show it, and we were busy. And Lloyd was, in one of his moods. I said, these guys showed up. They're here to see us all. Make them wait. Make them wait. So they literally sat in the lobby, which is not a fancy lobby. It's little like 4 feet next to a staircase, with some old chairs we found on the street. And they sat there for hours and hours. At least they were warm. And then finally, like at the end of the day, we said, all right, you guys, come on in, show us what you got. And they come in, they're all excited, and they take out this, 3/4 inch U-matic videotape and pop it in the machine. And this really gross, disgusting, but wildly imaginative film, Redneck Zombies, great title, comes on, and they tell us the story how they were inspired by Troma and they made this film themselves and blah blah blah. Long story short, we acquired the film for distribution, fixed it up a little bit. It's to this day considered a Troma classic. But more importantly, Perry Lunis, who was one of the filmmakers, he never left. He
Wow.
literally he never went back to Maryland. He stayed. He camped out at the office until he found a place to live, and he became part of the Troma team. And he acted in our films. He was a great special effects guy. He did a lot of the special effects in Toxic Avenger 2 and 3, in Kabuki Man. If you've seen the movie, which I co-wrote, Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD, in the opening scene, there's this Kabuki character who reaches in and takes a big wad of worms, live worms, and stuffs them in his mouth and starts eating them. That's Perry doing that in the Kabuki makeup. Like, the guy would do anything for filmmaking. He was amazing, super talented. I still think he's involved in independent film in Maryland to this day. But he never left. He came, dropped off his film. We acquired his film. He made a little bit of money, and he never left and stayed for years working on our films and playing a very big, important role in Troma.
I love it. Well, I think
yeah.
that's a great lesson, and don't just let the resume be the factor. Be open to interesting talent opportunities coming from unlikely places. So that's pretty exciting.
And as you mentioned before, Dylan, the passion. I mean, these guys displayed passion, tenacity, marketing skills, all these things that you wouldn't have seen on a resume. A resume is not going to tell you that I'm willing to sleep outside overnight just to get a chance to show my film to a potential distributor. that's something that you only can see by the actions taken.
Yeah, and who would know that these would be the guys that made a technological innovation in being the first film from VHS direct to distribution from tape
Yeah.
too. That's pretty wild. So, on a panel for independent film marketing, you had an interesting perspective that you talked about. Really, there's two audiences that you have to market to. First, you're marketing to your distributor relationships because you really don't have a shot unless you can get your film somewhere where people can see it, buy it, get access to it. Can you talk about those two phases in the independent film marketing landscape and how you have to first start with a distributor before you move on to the consumer?
Yeah, and of course it's changed quite a lot now because some gatekeepers have been removed and then some new gatekeepers have emerged, right? So there's been a shift, but you do have opportunities today to go direct to consumer, so to speak, direct to your audience through YouTube and other channels. It's still very tough to build that audience, and that awareness. And so in some cases now, from a marketing perspective, more than the distributor, you want to look for partnerships with people with an audience. And that's why I think, in many respects, influencer marketing, which I really don't like the term. There's no such thing as an influencer. There's such thing as influence, right?
Yeah.
Influencer is a term that's been made up because of all these people in social media. But what you really want is to find people who actually have influence, and they're not necessarily the same thing. But you can find the substitution for distribution in the traditional sense could be partnering with someone who actually does have an audience, who actually does have influence, who can help get your film or your project seen by others. And so there are some opportunities that are different, but yeah, I mean, distribution is still key. It's still why film festivals are still very important. Why so many filmmakers, even if they made their film in their iPhone, they're submitting it to festivals and ways for distributors to see them and hopefully pick them up and help get them to the Netflixes and the streaming services of the world today. So, it's a challenge. And I think in today's world, the opportunity is for business to have that direct to consumer relationship, which didn't used to be the case. It's why the music industry went through such turmoil, in the last 10, 15 years, because it's come out of it today. And I think it's a lot healthier than it was when I was in that business, when I worked for a company called Mixer in the heyday of ringtones. We were one of the leading ringtone providers in the world. It was pretty interesting. But the music industry's customer historically was never the person who listened to the music. Their customer were the rack jobbers, the distributors, and the radio stations that could play the music. So they never built any systems or any methodology or even any marketing messages that spoke to the person listening to the music, because all they cared about was getting it distributed so that it could show up in the record stores and get played on the radio. And that was it. So when all of a sudden MP3s and streaming emerged, and there was this ability to go direct to the music listener, the record companies, for the most part, didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to deal with it. And that's why all these new businesses and new opportunities and Spotify and everything else emerged, because they understood from the ground up how to speak to the music listener directly. And I think that applies, or is beginning to apply, to potentially to certain other forms of information, of entertainment, including filmmaking and television. It's going to be interesting to see how things evolve, with apps and IP-based TV. I mean, you know, we'll see a future where a strong enough production company creative team, can go direct to the consumer without having to go through a streaming service.
Wow.
The technology exists today. It's just a matter of consumer behavior. That's another lesson I've learned over the years too. Is technology is not the hard part, right? The technology moves faster than consumer behavior. The hardest part is changing consumer behavior. I had a company that I was a co-founder of in 1999 called barpoint.com. And we were an early player in mobile commerce. And back in 1999 and 2000, before there was internet, and the mobile internet was the WAP browser. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember a WAP browser, but that was
Yeah.
the internet on your phone before smartphones. We had a service called Barpoint that was on all of the major carriers in the U.S., AT&T, Sprint, Nextel, Singular, and Verizon at the time. And you could open up your phone's web browser and type in the UPC barcode number for any product and immediately see price comparisons, reviews, in some cases even purchase it from your phone in 2000
Wow.
before smartphones. Great technology, but then the consumer wasn't ready to do it. We had great technology, we had great distribution. We had 3 people who used the service because consumer behavior wasn't there yet. Today, no one thinks twice about opening up their phone, searching for things, buying things, etc. So the technology that we're using today, although it's better, the basics of that has been around for 25, 30 years. It's only now that consumers are ready to accept that as part of their everyday behavior.
Yeah, totally. And if you think about VOD in the streaming world, not having to go through a traditional platform like an iTunes or a Netflix or something, or an Amazon Prime, companies like Angel Studios come to mind, right? Like the most successful crowdfunding campaign of all time, raising $25 million from their audience to produce the Chosen series and some of the films that they've released to that audience that they now own through their own app.
Yep.
And then, all those projects are showing up in traditional windows in the second and third windows. You've got Chosen ranked in the top 100 of most downloaded TV shows on iTunes, and then I just saw them pop up on Netflix. So whether that's your cup of tea or not, they've done a pretty amazing job in aggregating a passionate audience base and then programming directly to them with high quality, high production value entertainment product.
Yep.
Interesting. So cool. Well, I like to, hit the home stretch here on kind of some of the stuff that you're involved in now, but I also think it would be interesting to touch base on the idea, you mentioned that you hate the word of being an influencer. But whether you call it a content creator or somebody of influence, you were early in the dad blogging space and had some success there. And also, got invited by Intel and Sony and Ford to participate in brand campaigns. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into that and your experience as kind of an early day influencer?
Yeah, I mean, it was just my kids were young. I like to write, and so in 2004, I think I first started blogging. Not daily, but reasonably, and then started blogging every once in a while about some things to do with my kids and being a dad, and then hooked up with Chris Brogan, who's well-known social media marketing guy who had started a blog called Datomatic. And Chris was a friend because I met him through Twitter, the early days of Twitter, actually, back in like 2007, and started writing for Datomatic and helping him run Datomatic, and then became sort of a dad blogger. And we did Datomatic, and then started to get involved with different brands. So Sony did a program called the Sony Digidads, and I was one of 5 Sony Digidads that they picked to give us Sony equipment and have us use it with our family and post stuff. And Sony was really terrific because they gave us no restrictions. And
Wow.
if you look at my YouTube page, there's some of the videos I did for Sony were a little bit out there, and I thought they were going to fire me. In one case, they had a laptop that folded very small. It was designed to like fit in a woman's purse. I don't know if you Google it. I think it was the Vio. I think it was called the Vio.
Yeah, I remember
And it
that
was
one.
like it was almost like a small keyboard, but his laptop. And I did a video of my daughter and I playing ping pong, and I'm using that as the ping pong paddle, and it's like it's a ping pong paddle. It's a computer, And I opened it up, and it was kind of crazy, but they loved it, and they used all that stuff. So then the 5 Sony Digidads, we started a podcast afterwards called The Cast of Dads, which we did for a number of years because we wanted to stay together. So as The Cast of Dads, we started getting invited to a lot of brand events for LG, for Ford, Sony. I mentioned I was an Intel advisor, which is what they called their kind of influencer program for a couple of years. That was really great. Intel was a great partner and took us to the CES show a few years. And iJustine was an Intel advisor the same time I was.
Interesting.
So we were Intel advisors together, and a bunch of other people. So it was a lot of fun. Back then I think the brands did maybe a better job than they're doing now, and some did it better than others. The big difference was, and it was really interesting, and this was a good lesson from that experience, is, you know, influencer marketing is not about building a campaign. It's about building a relationship.
Right.
And some of these brands treated it like a campaign, meaning, and I won't name names, but they'll invite us to one specific event, pay us a bunch of money, wine and dine us, have us do a few posts about their products, and then we never hear from them again. Period.
Right.
That's it. The end of it. You know, versus other brands like Sony, who really nurtured the relationships and did some things on an ongoing basis for a long period of time across a lot of different products. So we developed a much tighter relationship, and then the content that we created became more natural and more authentic because it wasn't like a one and done campaign. It was like, hey, we've got a relationship with this company. You know, we believe in their products. It became much more natural, and I think that's the key to success with influencer marketing. And there has to be a fit. You know, you can't just slap any influencer to any product and hope that it's going to look authentic, because if it's obvious that this person is just doing it for the money and it's not a product that they would actually use. So when we were at paw.com, when I was CMO of paw.com, anytime we worked with any influencer or any type of partner like that, you know, it was important that they actually had dogs, you know, that they used our products. Like, you know, we weren't going to have someone who doesn't own a dog pitching our dog products, right, and just faking it, right,
Yeah.
with their neighbor's dog, right. They really had to be, you know, had to be endemic, and that's really important. And sometimes you can stretch that. When I was when we launched .club, getting into the domain industry a little bit, we launched in a big way with a partnership with 50 Cent, because his
Yeah.
number one song is
Up in
in
the
the
club.
club, in the club, right? So, you know, we did a whole big event and a whole big promotion with him, which was really fun, because again, he has nothing to do with domain names, but he had a really big association with the word club, and
Yeah,
that's what we were
that's really
trying to
smart.
promote. So the in the club thing worked in that instance, right? And he was the only musical artist that would have made sense for us to do something with. You know, even if we could have gotten arguably a bigger name to just do something with, it would have just been a meaningless partnership because there was no connection. He had the connection because of in the club. You know, and
Yeah.
every time someone would hear the song after that event, they would think of .club.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's kind of like Snoop Dogg almost appears everywhere these days, and to some degree, it's almost become funny that he's like,
Yeah.
you know, working with LinkedIn and working with Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
Like he'll take any job, and it's almost become a caricature that he will take almost any endorsement. So,
But the best influencers, when you think about it too, are going to be your customers, right? So
yeah, yeah,
at Dot Art, so I'm the CMO of Dot Art, and Dot Art's a great extension. You know, we have over 250,000 users, everything from very famous artists like Maria Abramovich to up and coming artists to people who are passionate about art to museums like the Louvre to brands like Porsche.art and Mercedes-Benz.art, galleries, museums, et cetera. So it's a great extension for all types of arts. But when it comes to our marketing activities and where we want to, the stories we want to tell, it's not about us. It's not about .art and the domain business. That's not that interesting. What's interesting is what people do with those domains. So a lot of our marketing, especially our social media marketing, is focused on shining a light on the artists who are using a .art domain, on helping them gain exposure and helping them gain distribution and awareness. Because since they're using a .art domain, when they get noticed, we get noticed, right? People discover that, oh, I didn't even know there was a .art domain when they see, you know, MAI.art, which is the Maria Abramovich Institute, and they go to an event there. Oh, it's MAI.art. I didn't know there was a .art. So we focus, and our influencers are the artists and the businesses and the galleries and the brands who are using a .art domain. So we try to share their stories and shine a light on them and amplify their efforts, because that in turn amplifies our awareness. You know,
yeah.
and I
That's
think
really
that's true for
smart.
most companies. Your customers are really going to be your best influencers, not necessarily someone you hired because they have a big audience.
Yeah, no, you always have figuring out ways to start with your own customers is always going to be advantageous. I think one of the challenges these days, and it sounds like you've done a good job in figuring it out, is, you know, how do you find those customers that are social media relevant people? Like, what are the methodologies, whether it's through social listening or email matching. You talked a lot about some really smart marketing tactics on, leveraging email addresses and customer data. But I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of brands is, a lot of influencers don't talk about the brands that they like anymore because they don't want to be considered as a conflict with another brand. Like we recently did a campaign for Corona, and they unfortunately canceled some work with one of the influencers just because they had attended an Anheuser-Busch event, and they didn't even get paid for that. So a lot of influencers are being a little bit more careful about shouting out brands, even if they love them, which is sad, because then how do you find those authentic connections without, having one-on-one conversations? But I think that's, but it's definitely a great point.
Yeah, it's interesting with domain names, and I know what you wanted to mention a little bit, like a domain name as a branding asset is really powerful.
Yeah.
And for the most part, you can get a great domain for less than the cost of a marketing campaign, and it's actually a digital asset that has value beyond your use of it. And if you're involved in art, for example, a .art domain has SEO value. Because if someone's searching for Dylan Conroy, DylanConroy.com could be anyone. But if you were an artist and someone was searching for Dylan Conroy, the artist, the .art name is going to come up right at the top of search. They're going to know that of all the Dylan Conroys that are out there, that's the one who's the artist I've been looking for. And even brands who are involved in the arts, it's really interesting because both Porsche and Mercedes have Porsche.art and Mercedes-Benz.art, but they don't use it for their normal website. In both cases, they've built separate websites for .art in two different ways, which is really interesting. So Porsche.art is a dedicated website highlighting some of the art installations and things Porsche has done all over the world. Sometimes the cars are involved, sometimes they're just supporting different artists. It's really interesting about there. It's the art of dreams, and it's Porsche.art. Mercedes-Benz, on the other hand, like many corporations, especially big older corporations like Mercedes, they have an art collection. They have an art collection worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And so at Mercedes-Benz.art, they have a whole website promoting and talking about their art collection and showing off their corporate art collection. So there's a lot of ways to use domain names, whether it's .art or another domain, in addition to your existing domain. They didn't have to change from their .com name. They didn't have to change their website. They had other use cases for .art. Even a bank like Bank of America uses bankofamerica.art and BOFA.art, not for a separate website, but it's a deep link to the section of their .com website where they talk about their art practice, because they have an art practice where they advise high net worth people about art investments and things like that. So it's a shortcut. It's a marketing shortcut. So it's really interesting. And I think there's 1,000 new domains. I mentioned .club. I work for .art. There's other names. And in the past, there was a belief that you could not have a successful business unless it was on a .com domain. Paul Graham, who is the founder of Y Combinator, famously said that in a blog post a few years back, where he said basically, if your company name is X and you don't own X.com, change your name or something like that, right? Yet just yesterday, a really cool AI company called Pika is using Pika.art. That's their domain name. And yesterday they announced they raised $55 million from some A+ VCs and investors. And they launched, you got to check it out, they launched a text to video AI product, which is amazing. I mean, think of ChatGPT for video, meaning you put in a text prompt and it spits out video, not an image from Dolly, but an actual video. Their demo video that's on their website is amazing at Pika.art. So they're going to be successful. They raised a bunch of money. They don't have a .com domain. They have a .art domain. So I think the world has changed. And I think when you can find that domain name that expresses your brand, that adds context to your brand, it can be a very powerful marketing and branding tool.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think .com is even maybe looked at as, not cutting edge anymore. It seems like like we worked with Hinge, and Hinge was just Hinge.co, the dating app, so it seems like everybody is, rather than fight those fights of trying to track down the original owner and paying an absorbent fee for the .com, it seems like figuring out a way to tie in with some of these alternative brand extensions like .art or Dart Club, some of the things that you've been involved with. I've kind of firsthand seen the negative effects of not having a good, our domain is sostandard.com. And I think we just did it because it was cheap and easy, but we constantly get confused. People are like, oh yeah, you guys are sos.com. And it's like, oh man, it's like the confusion that you can cause in the marketplace by not owning and having a great domain strategy. It really needs to be thought through. So I love your insight on tying that strong domain name to your brand.
And there's Web3 to think about too. So with .art, so we've made .art ENS compatible. So every .art name can have its matching ENS name, so it can work in Web 2 and Web 3. So it can point to your website and your email, and also point to a crypto wallet or some asset on the Ethereum and other blockchain networks. And only the person who owns the DNS domain name can have the matching ENS name, so there can't be any confusion. So if you own,
you're kind of creating digital ownership with it as well.
Yeah, and this way, we don't know where Web3 is going to go, but this way you're guaranteed, you're kind of future-proofed, and you can have a consistent brand across both worlds with the .art domain, right?
I love that. Well, awesome, Jeff. Well, hey, we're getting down to the final run. Really appreciate you spending so much time with us tonight to walk through your book and some of your marketing stories and your experience. So for the last question of the night, what are you most excited about the future with all the things that you have currently going on?
I actually am really pretty excited about AI in general. And as a company, .art has been very pro AI, and we encourage the team to use AI in different ways and find different use cases and things that can help us be more efficient. And I think just from an art perspective, I think AI and all these tools is going to create more art, not less. And I know there's a lot of controversy over IP rights and stuff, but that'll get settled, I think, in different ways. But it's really interesting because as human beings, I think we all have a creative spark inside of us, but some of us have greater ability to transfer that creativity in our mind into other medium, whether that's writing, drawing, singing, whatever. And I think what AI is doing is giving more people the tools to take what's in their head and put it out in other medium and leveraging that AI as a means of expressing themselves in other ways. So I'm really interested to see how it all pans out. But from a pure human efficiency and convenience level, you still have to be very careful. But I think it's pretty interesting the different things we're able to do. And I find myself using different AI tools in different ways almost every day, just in terms of my general workflow. So I think that's pretty interesting, scary at the same time, but pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, that tends to be that's kind of the question that I like to sign off with a lot of guests, and it tends to be a reoccurring answer, especially for the last few months and weeks. And I agree, working with Adobe for over 7 years, even before AI was a big topic amongst their product set, we used to have people on the developer and graphics side, get scared when we launched a new feature that really shortened workflows, that made things that people used to spend a lot of time on be done in an instant. And people got territorial. I think innovation, in my opinion, around AI, all it's doing is making tedious things less tedious. It's not limiting human creativity. And I think that's really the future of where all this stuff is headed for.
And we've seen this movie before. In other words, how did you write before there was a word processor and then Word, right? But we still write words, we still create words. And, everyone thought when TV came, radio was going to be dead. We still listen to radio. Actually, radio is still a thriving industry. Everyone, every new technology breakthrough, everyone assumes it's going to kill everything before it, but instead it just changes things, enhances things, new opportunities and new things evolve from it. So I'm cautiously bullish.
Same. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for spending time with us in the audience tonight. This has been a great show. Really appreciate you sharing your book and the background. And for everybody, again, Jeff W. Saas, everything I know about business and marketing that I learned from Toxie, the Toxic Avenger. So here's a quick picture of it if you want to snap on it, and we will link it in the show notes. I definitely recommend it. It's a great, fast read, and it's got a lot of really great stories and good, not just marketing tactics and lessons, but also business tactics and lessons. So Jeff, thanks so much for sharing your story.
And Dylan, one last thing, a little marketing hack with domain names. So no one's going to remember the title of that book, but if you just go to toxicavenger.marketing, there's actually a .marketing, and that'll take you right to the page on Amazon.
There we go.
Toxicavenger.marketing. There you go.
From the domain marketing master himself, a shortened URL. Well, for everybody that's watching at home, thanks so much for spending time with us tonight. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you got value from this show, don't forget to share it with a colleague. And if you have an opportunity to review the show, leave us a 5-star review. That's how we get discovered by more people. So thanks for everybody watching at home. And Jeff, thanks again for your time tonight.
Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate it.